This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome our returning celebrity guest, the renowned horror novelist and podcaster. You know her from her previous appearances on Scream and The Shining. It's V.P. Morris.
Thank you for such an enthusiastic intro. I'm happy to be back and discussing one of my favorite movies ever.
Well, we discussed your favorite film of all time last time, so I have a feeling that this is right in that same wheelhouse. You'll have some surprises for us?
Yeah, I think there'll be some unpopular opinions, but overall, I mean, it's really hard to have an unpopular opinion about this movie.
We love the hot takes. It makes for great social content. All right. So, tonight, for our 221st episode, without further ado, we discuss the seminal mystery classic, Rear Window, celebrating its 70th anniversary this week. Directed by Alfred Hitchcock, written by John Michael Hayes. Music by Franz Waxman. Starring James Stewart as LB Jefferies. Grace Kelly as Lisa Fremont. Wendell Corey as NYPD Detective Lieutenant Thomas Tom J. Doyle, Thelma Ritter as Stella, Raymond Burr as Lars Thorwald, Judith Evelyn as Miss Lonelyhearts, Ross Bagdasarian as the songwriter, Georgine Darcy as Miss Torso, and Sarah Berner and Frank Cady as the couple living above the Thorwalds. Recognition for this movie, Rear Window, was released on August 4th, 1954. It garnered widespread critical acclaim, even ranking 5th on Guy Here du Cinema's Top 10 Films of the Year list in 1955. On a budget of roughly $1 million, the film would gross nearly $37 million over its total box office run, and earning it the number 4 spot in the 1954 box office domestically. Rear Window would receive 4 Oscar nominations for Best Director for Hitchcock, one of, I think, only 3 that he garnered. I believe it's Psycho, Rear Window, and Rebecca, maybe? Adapted screenplay for John Michael Hayes. Cinematography in color and sound recording. In 1998, Time Out magazine conducted a poll and Rear Window was voted the 21st greatest film of all time. In 2022, Time Out magazine ranked the film at number 26 on their list of the 100 best thriller films of all time. In the British Film Institute's 2012 Sight and Sound polls of the greatest films ever made, Rear Window was ranked 53rd among critics and 48th among directors. In the 2022 edition of the magazine's greatest films of all time list, the film ranked 38th in the critics' poll. In 2017, the Empire magazine's readers' poll ranked Rear Window at number 72 on its list of the 100 greatest movies. Rear Window has been recognized by the AFI on the following lists. At number 42 in AFI's 100 Years 100 Movies, at number 14 in AFI's 100 Years 100 Thrills, at number 48 in AFI's 100 Years 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition, and at number 3 in AFI's 10 Top 10 in the Mystery category. Rear Window currently holds a 98% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 100 score on Metacritic, and a 4.4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we start each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
Well, this is a film that I'm pretty sure my dad had seen and told me about and always talked about, but it wasn't available. It wasn't available. Hitchcock purchased it from studio, held it for a while, and then it wasn't released, I think, again to theaters until 83. And then it made its way onto VHS in the late 80s. So I think I rented this somewhere, probably in law school or maybe after I just got out. And so the first time I would have seen it was in there, probably in that late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, there weren't any re-releases in theaters. As you had mentioned, it was one of, I think, 4, maybe 5 projects that he had bought himself, along with, I know The Man Who Knew Too Much was in there. I'm pretty sure Dial M was in there. And I don't know what else would have been, if it was Vertigo or maybe Psycho or something. And then use that as like his legacy fund for his daughter to give to her. I know that we've mentioned it on other Hitchcock films. When we did our Hitchcock month, I'm pretty sure it came up. But you are correct, and I don't want to spike the did you know section. There was a massive restoration that needed to be done in order for this film to even be seen in the 80s.
Oh. It was Dial M for Murder. It was Something About Harry, Rear Window, and I'm trying to remember what the fourth one was.
You mean Trouble with Harry?
Trouble with Harry.
Okay. I think that's 57 by my count, if I remember right.
I think it was a little earlier than that. It was in 55, 56. It was a comedy.
Well, regardless, maybe To Catch a Thief might have been in there, because that would have been about the same time period. But anyway, this is another one of those that I've been shown so often. I've seen it so many times, and because both of my parents are fans of this film, I don't remember the first time I watched it. No clue. It's always been a part of my life. V, how about you? What's your relationship to the film?
So most of my classic film knowledge started when I was in high school watching Turner Classic Movies Summer Under the Stars, and I would get a printout of their schedule, and I would circle the ones that sounded interesting, and I would spend my entire August before school starts scheduling my life around them because I found them so interesting. You know, my mom worked full time and I'm not sporty, so I didn't have any sports camps to go to in the summer. So movies and hanging out with my friends were my summer. And I was kind of sick of seeing the stuff that came out in the mid 2000s, which I don't think is the best time for cinema. So I really enjoyed diving into the old stuff, and I remember seeing this for the first time when I was probably 16, and it blew me away of how perfect it is in terms of writing. I had been interested for a while in writing, but I was, still very young and very new, and I just thought that it was just perfectly executed. There really isn't a scene or a moment that is wasted in this, and that has always sort of inspired me as this perfection in the sort of suspense mystery realm.
Yeah, I would argue that this might be his funniest movie of any of the major classics that we talk about. I mean, it's definitely funnier than Shadow of a Doubt, Dial M, Strangers on a Train, Psycho, obviously, Vertigo. Those are not funny films. This has got a lot of really quippy lines going through the quotes section that I found, and I'm like, I don't even remember all of these things. They must have been just delivered a mile a minute.
Yeah, that's the other part that I like, is that especially talking to other people and trying to get them interested in classic films, if they're not into the horror or the scary stuff, something like Psycho or Vertigo, or some things that up that tension too much might be a turnoff. But it's very quippy, which we'll get into. But Stella in the beginning is very funny. There's a lot of smart little comments about marriage and relationships between men and women that I think people who may not be into the suspense or the tension off the bat would actually find enjoyable. So I think it's kind of more widely appealing than many of his other films.
But I'll just add, and we'll get into that more as we start talking about performances, but any film that Thelma Ritter is in automatically has a certain quality of humor added to it.
Yeah, she's very spicy as a side character. And
yes,
we got that when we already talked about Pillow Talk back in season 1. So what is this movie about?
I actually think the whole thing is actually about marriage with murder in the middle. I think actually the whole overarching plot is actually about whether or not it is good to get married. And we will find out what the answer to that question is with murder in the middle. So I think that the first time I watched it, the first few times as a younger person, I also wasn't married, obviously, when I was 16, that I kind of ignored it. I thought they were funny little, wives who nag, and I never met a man who did what, all these little things, that kind of 1950s humor. I thought they were funny, but it didn't register with me because I had not been in a relationship of that magnitude yet. And now I have been, and rewatching it a few times this past year, I've noticed that that's actually what the movie's about. The movie's actually about all the different, I guess, iterations of marriage, the good, the bad, different aspects of being single, and kind of having to make that decision of, is it worth it or not? And so, I mean, obviously the plot is a wheelchair-bound photographer thinks he sees a murder across the way and enlists his girlfriend and his nurse to figure out what happened. That's obviously the plot, but I actually think the theme is that it's actually about if marriage is worth undertaking.
Yeah, I think you're describing the difference between plot and story.
Yes.
As I've heard it described to me before. I actually think you could take it one step further and say it's the difference in dichotomy between marriages. One that potentially is about to begin that might be toxic on a certain footing, and the one that is so toxic that it ends in murder.
I would add or throw into this mix that it also, the murder itself is the catalyst to change Jeff's mind as to her worth as a potential wife. His big thing is she's, I think there's a line in there, she's perfect. She's just perfect, except I'm not sure that's what I want type of deal. I'm paraphrasing. And it's not until she shows the chutzpah and the resources to pursue the murderer, the reckless charge into the den of inequity, that she, reaches a point where he thinks, oh yeah, maybe she is more than I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a notion to the adventure companion that is described by the end of this film, and he kind of bonds with her in a different way. I think anytime that you have kind of an unusual experience with someone, it gives you a certain level of bonding that you wouldn't otherwise have. But in this case, they were previously bonded. It just went a little bit deeper. There's a higher degree of intimacy that's implied by the final moments of the film. I will also add something we haven't brought up yet. But one of the things I think that ages the best about this movie, even though it takes place in a time and a technology age that we've obviously we're no longer in. So it would change. If you updated this story at all, it would be much different. But it's the voyeuristic aspect that it kind of predicts and brings on from us. And especially in a digital age where we're living constantly on the internet, where we can put Google alerts on each other and figure out if any of our friends have done any wrongdoing, that it's kind of unnerving how much information you can get on anybody anymore.
The one thing that struck me is, this is 1954. Where's his television? I mean, if this were today, that's what you'd be doing instead of looking out your rear window. You'd be watching television, which is ultimately the most voyeuristic medium available.
I don't know if I would say that. I would say Facebook or any of social media. It's much more voyeuristic. It's literally inviting you to look at other people's lives. I mean, I would say as a guy who probably doesn't spend much time at home, that a TV would not necessarily be something that interests him. He does have a radio there. It is only the 50s yet. But then it also begs the question, if he's not there long enough to watch television, how is he there long enough to have a steady girlfriend? I guess I don't understand the relationship cultures and attachments of the 50s in the same way that I don't understand the media technologies.
Well, I got the impression that he's the type of person who's always on the go. Even if he is stationed in New York for whatever time, he wants to be out. So I feel like he met her out doing things, and that most of their relationship has been events or adventures around the city together, and that they're not in his house. And that's why I think the scene where she does bring her nightgown over for the first time, or I don't know if it's the actual first time, but it seems to be significant in their relationship. I don't think that they've just we're going to just kind of Netflix and chill, because that wasn't a thing then. And I also think, up until about maybe the 90s or the 2000s, I felt like there was a set of person that prided themselves on not having a television, that they were kind of I'm an intellectual, I'm kind of above you people. And I kind of got that vibe from him, even if he's not a professor per se. He kind of has this idea that he's not like the rest of society. He doesn't need a wife. He doesn't need stability. And I think, and also, especially since TVs cost so much money, he probably was well, if I'm not going to be in my apartment for more than a month total, I'm not going to spend like, I don't know, an eighth of my salary on this or something.
I mean, that's a pretty convincing argument. I would buy into that.
And don't forget plot convenience.
Well, that's true. Yeah. I mean, this is developed from a short story where you don't even find out until the last line that he had a broken leg.
Oh, interesting. I also believe the short story came from the 30s, the late 30s, if I remember looking that up. So that would kind of explain why there is no television and why they would have to adapt it that way.
Yeah, that would make sense. Now, I was going to ask, and we've kind of stepped on it a little bit, whether we think that this movie could be remade in more of a modern sense. I guess in an internet era, I still think it could be made, but it would just be much different. And you obviously couldn't call it Rear Window because most people live, outside of maybe urban settings where you're in an apartment. There's just not the Rear Window aspect where you could probably spy on this many neighbors. Shared courtyards, I don't think is quite as much of a thing where you can see into their apartments in the way that this movie is constructed. But I think if you did it, it would probably be in an internet vein. You're able to spy on your friends and their relationships, and you're starting to notice things in their pictures on Instagram or little things that they're writing in their Twitter posts or anything like that. I think that's how you'd have to do it.
Well, I was actually thinking you could do it through like a Ring doorbell, because if you're going to keep the like spying on neighbor thing, if he's never home and now all of a sudden he's home and he never really checks his Ring doorbell and he just kind of like is messing around with it for funsies and he sees like it's 3 a.m. and my neighbor is bringing the trash out, like why is he doing that? And it happens like all the time and it's not trash day, or just sort of like noticing little inconsistencies, because if you're like a traveling profession and now you have to be home, I could see you maybe getting addicted to watching the footage on your phone and kind of like, and if he has a detective friend, like cutting the footage and emailing it to him, and the detective's like, this isn't good enough. This is just some guy messing around in his yard at 3 a.m. You got to do better than that.
I like it.
They still do have courtyards in large cities.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in Manhattan, and very few places. I mean, it's changed a lot, obviously, in the time that it's been. So, like, a lot of that neighborhoody feel is not there anymore. That most things are, because the apartment I had, it was a high rise. There is no courtyard. Like, you look down and you see so many different. There's no way you could just focus on like a few neighbors. There's just so much going on. So, I mean, there's some more neighborhoody places, like in the Village, where you could still have a bit of seclusion, and there are places where they have private parks or things with keys that you have to own the rights to. So I think it's possible today, but the setup generally that they have is just not really existent in New York these days. So I think you would have to come up with some other format for how this person. I was thinking maybe a house that's behind an apartment building, kind of like maybe a 3 or 4 story apartment building. There's a wall and then it's a neighborhood. So you are looking into an apartment, but you're not in an apartment yourself, could possibly work. But yeah, it's kind of that. There's kind of a, I don't know, wholesome 50s vibe from this, even though there is murder. And I just feel like that kind of, I don't know, cutesy little neighborhood thing just doesn't really exist that much anymore.
No, I would agree with you. If you're doing it in a modern sense, like a few other weird twists that you could do with it. It's an agoraphobic who the only outside contact he has is through his like Ring cameras, and he has them set up strategically around his house. So his girlfriend is actually via the internet, and we only get her through a chat feed.
Oh,
like those are little details that you could just minorly change, and it completely changes the entire outlook of the film. She's like his gal Friday on the computer researching stuff because that's like part of her regular job or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually think it could be, this happens sometimes on like cop shows or like NCIS. So it's like obviously not, you'd have to be a very high level hacker to do it. But if the bad guy hacks into your Ring footage and can like put up a fake, like it's just the loop of his house while he's doing the murder, and like as it's happening he has to like fight against that to pull down his like fake loop of what's going on, or try to like recover the footage of the actual murder. So it could be kind of like a technical espionage battle going on, kind of like a Mr. Robot thing.
See, this is why you bring on an author. You've got all these great ideas just stored up. So then the only thing left And I'm kind of stepping on a listener question by doing this. It begs the question, I think we've said it on this program a couple of different times, that we have thought of this as being Hitchcock's best movie. I will say that, however, having recently rewatched this over the weekend, I don't think this is his best film. I think it's his most rewatchable film, but I don't know if it's his best.
No, Psycho's his best. Like, you can't, in my opinion, you can't undo Psycho. And I also actually don't think that this movie, which we'll get to it when we get to our ratings, I don't think this movie is as well known as his other works. I think there are some people who are not cinephiles who actually don't know that much about this.
I think I would be with you that I think Psycho is a little bit more name recognized, and Vertigo obviously taking a big step in being the number one all-time film, even for one list for that decade from 2012 to 2022 in the Sight and Sound poll, which is supposedly the barometer, even though we've been very critical on this program of their list and calling themselves the greatest movie of all time list. I don't know. Those two, I think, have a fonder recognition, although of the people that have seen all of these movies, I think this is the one that usually sticks out the most for people.
Well, as a writer, I would say it is his most rewatchable, and I would think it's his second best film, like just for pure writing and execution. I think Psycho just changed the name of horror, and a lot of modern horror would not exist without him making that film. So I have to give Psycho as his best, but I mean, it's a close second. It's neck and neck.
I know. At a certain point, it's like picking between Beatles songs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've got like 5 or 6. Like, you're not really upset if any one of them is the number one. Really, it's when you get that weird stranger in there that throws it completely off. Like the person who says, I don't know, 39 Steps is his best movie.
Yeah, I've never met anyone who said that. I'm sure some guy on Letterboxd thinks it, though.
That's probably true.
Well, I don't know. 39 Steps is what got me into Hitchcock. I happened to be... I had a day... Mondays, I had my first class in college my freshman year. Wasn't until 8 o'clock at night. So I had all day Monday open. And so I would sit and watch WGN TV out of Chicago, and they would show old movies all morning. And so I would watch all these old movies, and I saw this Earth 39 Steps, and I'm like, oh, this is really good. And so that kind of enticed me. But it depends on how you grade what is his best film. Okay, the most impactful, are we talking about the one that has the best execution? The one that, there's...
No. None of that has to do with it as far as I'm concerned. Well, or maybe in slightly different gradations. And we've discussed this on the program, even as recently as a few weeks ago, in the difference between best versus greatest. I think some of the things you're talking about, impact and the rest of it, are things felt outside of the film itself and how it's received both industry and audience, which are stuff that we're going to measure by the end of the show. But to me, when we're talking about best, it's just a matter of quality. So maybe execution goes into some of that, but we're talking a writing, direction, aspect, tone, things that you would normally grade a movie on in how quality it is, as opposed to all the other periphery.
Yeah, I understand your point, but it's going to be ultimately in the view of whoever's eyes see it. To me, I know that a lot of people aren't going to agree, but to me, the reason I love North by Northwest is because it has all the classic elements of Hitchcock, and he did them all perfectly. Would most people agree that that's his best film? Probably not. But for me, because it really touched me as far as the simplicity, but yet the tension and the suspense building throughout the film, it just worked for me more than others. So, but I mean, you could throw that in. You could throw in Notorious, which I think is a very underrated film. I really like Strangers on a Train also, which is an underrated film. So again, it's kind of like a Sophie's Choice.
Dad, do you want to dig more into the plot for this one? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
Oh, yes, I do. In Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, we find ourselves confined within the claustrophobic confines of a Greenwich Village apartment. Peering through the lens of LB Jefferies, James Stewart, a wheelchair-bound photographer. His summer pastime is a voyeuristic venture into the lives of his neighbors, a cross-section of urban archetypes, played out in the courtyard. Each window frames a fragment of humanity from the lonely Miss Lonelyhearts to the tantalizing Miss Torso. The plot pivots on Jeff's suspicion that a neighbor, Lars Thorwald, Raymond Burr, has murdered his wife. The suspicion, shared and fueled by his glamorous girlfriend, Lisa, Grace Kelly, and his nurse, Stella, Thelma Ritter, drives the narrative forward. Hitchcock masterfully crafts tension, not through action, but through the act of watching, turning the audience into voyeurs, complicit in Jeff's obsessions. Rear Window is not merely a suspense thriller. It is a mediation on isolation and the ethics of observation. Stewart's performance, marked by vulnerability and determination, anchors the film's exploration of human curiosity and its consequences. Grace Kelly, in her role, adds a layer of sophistication and intrigue, embodying the tension between adventure and domesticity. Rear Window remains a timeless classic, a window not just into the lives of its characters, but into the genius of Hitchcock's cinematic vision.
Thank you. Now, for this one, I found too many things to be able to cut, so we have a double-sized Did You Know section. Let's start here. Did you know? This movie was shot on one specially constructed set that took 50 men 2 months to build and cost somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 at the time. That would be equivalent of from $840,000 to $1.12 million in 2022, adjusted for inflation. In order to get the scale right, the soundstage floor had to be removed so the courtyard could be built in a former storage space in the basement. Therefore, Jeff's apartment, which looks and appears to be on the second floor, was actually at street level. The apartment courtyard set measured 98 feet wide, 185 feet long, and 40 feet high, and consisted of 31 apartments, 12 of which were completely furnished. The courtyard was set 20 to 30 feet below stage level, and some of the buildings were the equivalent of 5 or 6 stories high. Live birds and cats were allowed to wander about the courtyard for added realism. The whole thing became a marvel that visitors to the studio were eager to see, and it was featured in magazine spreads while shooting was still in progress. Did you know? 1,000 arc lights were used to simulate sunlight. Thanks to extensive pre-lighting of the set, the crew could make the changeover from day to night in under 45 minutes. The set had to have 4 lighting setups always in place for various times of the day. Remote switches located in Jeff's apartment controlled the lighting. Virtually every piece of lighting that wasn't employed on another Paramount Pictures movie had to be used, by some counts, 1,000 huge arc lights and 2,000 smaller ones. At one point, the lights caused the sprinkler system to go off, which shut everything down and plunged the set into total darkness. Sir Alfred Hitchcock calmly told an assistant to bring him an umbrella and let him know when the rain had stopped. Did you know? While shooting, Alfred Hitchcock worked only in Jeff's apartment. The actors and actresses in other apartments wore flesh-colored earpieces so that he could radio directions to them. Did you know? According to Georgine Darcy, the man and woman on the fire escape struggling to get out of the rain was based on a prank by Sir Alfred Hitchcock. Each actor and actress in the apartment complex facing Jeff's rear window wore an earpiece through which they could receive Hitchcock's directions. Hitchcock told the man to pull the mattress in one direction and told the woman to pull in the opposite direction. Unaware that they had received conflicting directions, the couple began to fight and struggle to get the mattress inside once the crew began filming. The resulting mayhem, in which one of the couple is tossed inside the window with the mattress, provided humor and a sense of authenticity, which Hitchcock liked. He was so pleased with the result that he did not order another take. Did you know? Sir Alfred Hitchcock gave Georgine Darcy free range to choreograph her own dance moves for her character, Miss Torso. Darcy was to dance under her own volition during filming. Hitchcock's only restriction was that he forbade her to take professional dance lessons, as he wanted her to maintain the imprecision of an amateur dancer. Did you know? All of the sound in this movie is diegetic, meaning that all the music, speech, and other sounds all come from within the world of the movie, with the exception of non-diegetic orchestral music heard in the first 3 shots of the movie. Did you know? All the apartments in Thorwald's building had electricity and running water and could be lived in. Did you know? Sir Alfred Hitchcock supposedly hired Raymond Burr to play Lars Thorwald because he could be easily made to look like his old producer, David O. Selznick, who Hitchcock felt interfered too much. Did you know? Grace Kelly was offered this film and On the Waterfront at the same time. She chose Rear Window because she thought the role of Lisa, who worked in the world of fashion, as she once did, suited her better. Did you know? According to Thelma Ritter, Alfred Hitchcock never told actors and actresses if he liked what they did in a scene. And if he didn't like it, quote, he looked like he was going to throw up. Did you know? Sir Alfred Hitchcock liked working with James Stewart, especially in comparison to his other most frequent star, Cary Grant, who was fussy and demanding. Stewart, in Hitchcock's eyes, was an easygoing, workmanlike performer. However, Wendell Corey, who appeared with Stewart in several movies, said the actor also had a whopping big ego and could intimidate even Hitchcock by outshouting and out-arguing him if he thought a scene wasn't going well. There was steel under all that mush, Corey said. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 222nd episode, we welcome our new celebrity guest, Frank Mendoza of the Silver Screeners podcast, to discuss one of the most often discussed film twists of all time for its 25th anniversary, The Sixth Sense, written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan, music by James Newton Howard, starring Bruce Willis, Toni Collette, Olivia Williams, and Haley Joel Osment. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's ReelGood. Also, before we get back into our regular programming, this would be our section for Ask Dana Anything. And unfortunately, we are dry from our listener questions. So if you do want to get any of those in, please write us at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com or slide into our DMs on any of our socials at GMote Podcast on Instagram, Letterboxd, TikTok. Gosh, I think even on YouTube now, we're at GMote Podcast. So find us there. But I will open up the floor if our guest has an Ask Dana Anything question.
So I have 2 questions. One can pertain to Rear Window, but maybe I should save it towards the end when we start having more of a discussion about questions. But one that's not related at all, and I'll start with that one. If you had to expatriate yourself to a country that's not the United States, where would you move to? And you can't come back to live. You can come back to visit, but not to live.
I guess I would have to pick a country that I've been in, because at least I know something about it. Probably Germany, simply because I've got enough exchange kids that are either living there or close there, or, and I've got friends or people I know well there. The prevalence of English would make it a little bit easier for me to transition back or transition there, but I guess that would be the place. I've been in a lot of countries. I think I've been in 42 countries or something like that last time I counted. But that just seems to be the one that would be the most likely.
Good choice. Solid choice. What about you, Tom? Why don't you answer too, even though it's not asking you anything?
Yeah. I've said for a long time that I guess I'm very afraid of travel where the language is such a barrier for me, given my proclivity towards communication. And so it would have to be some place where it's predominantly, or at least knows a lot of English, like they grew up on it. So Germany is pretty easy because most of the kids that kind of grew up in this era, if you're probably under 40 at this point, you grew up with a school system that taught a lot of English. I probably would not go to France for that very reason. I don't think it's culturally acceptable for them to, outside of maybe Paris, to know English and to look down on anybody who uses it. I guess if I were to pick one place, just because the cultural overlay is not as high, if I could afford it, I would live in London because I think that would be awesome. And I love a lot of British things, whether it's culture, politics, history, and frankly, their actors are better than ours currently. They invest a lot more in their actors than we do. But also my second sports love for the Tottenham Hotspur, that supersedes most things. So if I could figure out how to live there and basically go to games, I would do that.
By the way, I would add that I know the two phrases that are universally recognized in Germany to help me get around if I run into people who do not know German. Ich habe Ausschlag, I have a rash, and ich bin blau, I am drunk. If you use those two prudently, you can always find places on a train. You can explain any malaprop in word or action. They work perfectly. I got all over Germany like that.
I can hear my mother and sister screaming into the void about your use of the term ich.
Ich.
No. Ich.
Ich. Ich habe Ausschlag.
Oh, okay. We need to move.
We'll move on. My other question, my Rear Window related question is, who would you cast if they were redoing it today? No change in, like, we talked about tech stuff, but no change in tech. Like, let's just say it's the same movie, same set, even just the 2020s and whoever is, popular right now, who was in the appropriate age for these roles.
Christian Bale would be my choice to play Stewart, nice. Or do the Stewart part, just because of his range. I guess Margot Robbie as the Grace Kelly part, and she's probably too old now, but I was going to say Rosie O'Donnell is the Thelma Ritter part, but she's probably a little too old to do that.
Well, for me, I actually was thinking Rhea Perlman, which she's 75 now, yeah. Which, I was a little old, but, like, that role could be played by, I think you have to be a wiser old woman, but I feel like it could be as low as 50 and as high, like, as you could continue working reasonably. So I think I could see Rosie O'Donnell doing it. I don't know how old she is, but I think she's younger than Rhea Perlman. I picked Glenn Powell because he's really blowing up right now to be Jefferies. And he's not really as old yet to be, like, kind of, I'm experienced, but has that kind of charm, and he can play more, I guess, rugged and adventure-y. And obviously, I think Margot Robbie is pretty much the best pick for the Grace Kelly stand-in.
Yeah, it's really not hard to see that particular point. I guess it would depend on how they're doing the remake. If it's an agoraphobic who's just kind of a shut-in, I don't know if I want, like, somebody who's Glenn Powell good looking to do that part. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if he'd be believable. So then you're looking at somebody who's a little bit more stripped down, a little more nerdy, maybe not quite to the level of Eddie Redmayne. That would be my sister's fan cast.
That would
basically
be good,
any movie, that would be her fan cast because that's her nerd crush. But which I will never understand that one. But, like, maybe even a Paul Mescal who could probably disappear a little bit more into the role, even though he might be a little too ripped after Gladiator 2. It's hard not to do, like, a Margot Robbie, but I couldn't even see, like, Jennifer Lawrence in it. If you went for a diversity play, I actually think Zendaya would actually make a pretty good Grace Kelly role in that one. And then for the alternative, for the Raymond Burr Thorwald character, Tom Hardy, just because it's kind of a Bane-like hulking character.
Yeah. For the for Tom the cop, how about Willem Dafoe?
Yes.
They have to be contemporaries because they're war buddies.
Oh, that's right, yeah. So they'd have to match.
So
the
you'd
same
have to
age.
Yeah, you'd have to have somebody that's relatively, like, not terribly old, because I want to say, like, the Jefferies character's in his early 40s, and Grace Kelly's probably in her, like, late 20s.
You don't have to be completely contemporary, because, especially in World War II, there was a lot of times 10 years difference between ages of
But if you're making it set in modern times, you would think that army buddies, they would probably be within a few years of each other. Unless he was his CO.
It all depends on the circumstances. You could get away with it.
So I guess if they're going to be war buddies, then it probably has to be somebody who maybe has like PTSD, agoraphobia associated from like service in Iraq or Afghanistan or something. So maybe they would have a higher degree of physique. Actually, you know what? In that case, if you're going in that direction, because I think he could break himself down a little bit more, and I unfortunately I'm not sure how this would go about, because he'd probably try and make it into a Oscar baity type of thing. But Bradley Cooper, because he's played the smart type when he did Limitless, and he's also played the kind of like brawny type when he did American Sniper. So he's got a range that you could probably pull off with this.
Part of the cast could be very well that there's a psychotic break potential. So he says he's seeing it, and people are doubting him because of his mental health as to whether he actually is seeing what he claims.
But then the nurse character could be like his therapist or his counselor.
Yeah.
So that could be a much different role, as opposed to like the massage therapist who's coming by to like look in on him that way. I don't know.
Make him a sandwich.
There's a lot of possibilities with it. Good question. Good question.
Thank you.
All right. I think we left off at best performance. Dad, I'm pretty sure you have down Alfred Hitchcock?
Yes.
Wow.
Same.
Yeah, I mean, it's
hard to believe, huh?
Well, it's hard to get past him being this pretty much his movie. Like, even though Stewart's in just about every shot of the film, it's still Hitchcock's film. It's a tonal thing. It's a suspense thing. He's crafting each individual piece to fit a particular narrative. And
if you haven't figured it out, the male lead in every Hitchcock film is Hitchcock.
Okay.
Hitchcock creates a character that he would love to be, which is why he always puts the good-looking blonde, because that's what he was attracted to. It's in and of itself his voyeurism and getting to kiss the leading woman.
Yeah, I held back from the Did You Know section some of the creepy parts that I found on his wardrobe selection for Grace Kelly, and how much he was like intimately involved with Edith Head, trying to get stuff to make her look more busty. Yeah, it would not have gone well.
Yeah, okay.
V, who's your... Oh, you had Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Anything you wanted to add?
No, I mean, obviously, this does fit the... most of his movies are the meme of the writer/director's thinly veiled fetish, like foot shots in Tarantino movies. So, but I do like the metaphor of that it's a metaphor for cinema of itself, that the director is Jefferies' character, and we're watching through the director's lens the world play out, kind of like all the world's a stage. So I believe, I like how controlled everything is. That's one of the things that I enjoy about Hitchcock, and my other favorites are, people like Kubrick, who are very, unfortunately, controlling to their actors, but it does have a great end result. So that's why he's my best performance for this, because I can tell that he has carefully crafted every second of every frame. It's very clearly, nothing is left to chance. Nothing is sort of half done. So that's why he's there.
I mean, if I were to give him extra credit points even on top of it, as much as this is meticulously well made from a production design, costume design, etc., and, you want to put in all the execution for the acting and such, he's doing this within the same time frame where I think in the span of about not even 24 months, he does To Catch a Thief, Dial M, and this movie. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous by modern standards, that you could do these three movies so meticulously made and somehow get these all up within a year and a half almost of each other.
And at the same time, he was starting his television show.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
He must have been, I'm looking it up right now, he must have been a client of Dr. Feelgood.
All right. So I guess where this starts to get interesting is going to be secondary performance. I'm going to go with somebody that I don't think either of you is going to like or appreciate, given previous comments. I actually have Grace Kelly.
Oh.
I know. But the way that she is shot, the way that her character plays out, and the way that I think she kind of gives a certain level of spunky, but graceful. It lives up to her name, at least in my opinion, and is probably her most notable single role where we really remember her. So even though she may or may not be a great actress, again, I am not a great judge of knowing what exactly is or is not acting, good acting versus bad acting. I will say that I think that this somehow, whether she's guided into it by Hitchcock or the writing is just so good for her character or she just fit the role so she didn't really have to act, I think she's effective in the role.
I've got James Stewart for that because I think in general, which we'll get into, I think he's a better actor than most people, but than Grace Kelly, and I think he is able to bring a lot of different emotions to the surface easily, and that it might be also a bit that the writing is more male centric, so they're giving the male characters more to do. But I just see more range coming out of him, and he also has the added challenge of being in a wheelchair for the whole time, so he can't even use his body to be as expressive as he could be in a different role. So I think he did such a fantastic job.
For me, and I pointed right there behind me, is a photo of secondary A and secondary B. I gave a tie because I have both Thelma Ritter and James Stewart as my secondary performance. Not only did each of them do a great job, when the two of them are on the stage together and are in the scene doing their lines, it's gold. They had a rapport that they just seemed to be able to react and draw out good performances out of each other. They just seemed like they were longtime friends and could just relate and talk, and you were glad that they were able to have the conversations they did. So I went with both for my secondary performance.
You want to continue with charismatic?
Oh, I certainly can, and that's Grace Kelly. I don't believe Grace Kelly was a great actress. I think Grace Kelly was a great beauty, and that she made up for a lot of her deficiencies in emotional range and her ability to portray her emotional inner self by just being great or glamorous and beautiful. Unlike, and I know this may draw some criticism, I know the other great beauty sex symbol of the 50s, Marilyn Monroe, draws a lot of criticism. I think actually Marilyn Monroe was a pretty darn good actress. I think she was able to portray a lot more of her emotions and her feelings and add more to scenes than Grace Kelly did. But I think that Grace Kelly is the ultimate in what it is to be a movie star, which you don't necessarily have to be the greatest actress. You have to be something that portrays greatness within the confines of a camera.
Charismatic for you, V?
It's Thelma Ritter, because she's hilarious and so much fun. And actually, when we get to favorite scenes, basically, my favorites, a lot of them are her. Even though this movie is all about suspense and murder, she's just so much fun that even though she doesn't have much to do with the main tension, she's actually kind of what I think of first when I think of this movie, which is kind of weird because that's not what most people, they think of, them looking out the window together. But I think of her coming in and giving him kind of the business about wasting Grace Kelly's time.
So I also have Grace Kelly for my charismatic here. The opening scene, I think, is very infamous in how it's shot from that kind of like slow-mo version, and it's very angelic. It's kind of backlit with the particular gown. I think it's one of the reasons my mother likes this film is the fashion that's involved in it. And I mean, she looks angelic in the description there, but she's also got a lot that draws you to her. I think that's the only way you could get kind of a movie star role where she's not completely outacted by, I would agree, James Stewart, by all ifs, ands, or buts, is clearly a better actor. That's not saying really anything novel, but she, in my opinion, is not necessarily outshone partly because I think the writing does favor a little bit, especially towards the end, in who the true hero or the protagonist of the movie is. Gives her some equal weight by the end of it by really having more, at least physical agency in how it's portrayed. And then I do think that she has an ineffable quality that leads you to believe, well, yeah, why doesn't this idiot like wise up and try and marry this woman? Because if that's the point of the film, you can't not have that and still like the film. It doesn't make sense. Let's move to best scene. I have 5 nominees ready for us here. I have First Night with Lisa, which is what kind of the scene I was just mentioning. Then I have The Saw and the Knife. I have Consulting Doyle, which I think there are a couple of different scenes that can fit in on this, but I think it's the first time that Doyle really appears, and there's an extended sequence where there's kind of a repartee back and forth between Stewart and Doyle. Then I have Searching for the Wedding Ring, which is near the end, and finally Thorwald Attacks. Do we have any other ones that we'd like to nominate? I know I kind of glossed over a few.
Not for me.
I would just nominate the beginning with Stella entering and just the conversation between them. I mean, I know not a lot happens, and it's definitely not going to win the best scene, but I think it really sets the tone because you get a lot of exposition and a lot of information about who both of them are in that opening.
Okay, so we'll add Stella and LB to the nominations. That'll be our first one up. But out of these, what do we think is the best scene?
The wedding ring.
Agreed.
It'd be hard to pick against that. Obviously, it's the most kinetic of any of the scenes in here, so you have a certain attachment to it by extension of we're leaving the apartment. We've got the most tense situation going on. And I do think that's where the film really soars, is watching Stewart's reactions to her going into these places and, so for me, I would agree it's the most tense scene, but I think there are a lot of really good ones in here, but if I had to pick a best, I would agree. A favorite scene, Dad?
The Saw and the Knife. When he's sitting there trying to eat his breakfast, he's cutting his eggs, and where would you even begin to start cutting up a body? And then, all the blood as he's drinking his coffee, and he's, I just thought it was so cute. It asks all the questions as a film watcher you're asking. So it just connected with me.
For me, it's, I guess, watching the luggage is the best way I can describe it. So it's kind of the beginning of his suspicion of where he's waking up in the middle of the night and watching him leave with the luggage and come back every 30 minutes or so. And it's also, I guess it's kind of one long continuation where he does fall asleep and we see him leave with Mrs. Thorwald. And so that's really sort of Hitchcock at his best of playing with what the characters know and what the audience knows. So that's my favorite, because that's when the tension and kind of the meat of this story picks up from this luggage onward.
As far as most indelible, I have Thorwald Attacks. It's just the thing that I kind of remember is you kind of make this progression in your head. You roughly know the outline of the entire movie, and you may not remember individual moments, but you kind of generally remember the ending of him doing the flash bulbs and then kind of throwing him out the windows, him falling and breaking his legs again. So to me, that's the thing that if I think about this movie, that first comes to mind.
The scenes with the light bulb flashing, that's always, when I think of the film, that's the first thing I always think about, is him coming at him and him using what he had available, flash bulbs, to try to hold him off until he could get help.
For me, it's the wedding ring, but very specifically, not the whole scene where she is making an entrance and kind of skirting, climbing up the fire escape. It's just specifically when they get distracted by Miss Lonelyhearts taking her life and them missing the fact that she's in danger. So really from like Lonelyhearts to her being caught by Thorwald is my most indelible, because you have these two life or death situations that you have to manage. And even though I've seen this movie a number of times, rewatching it always just gives you that bit of panic, even though you know what's going to happen.
I would agree. It's the one place where it's really effective yet, and you know that because if it wasn't, this wouldn't be rewatchable.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that looks like a good spot for our second break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, As of this last month, all of our episodes are also now in video format. That's right, you can see my resting nerd face and all of Dana's famous okays in pristine high definition. So far, we have about 6 or 7 episodes up there, and they are all now available to watch. Just head to youtube.com/@Gmote podcast. You got to remember the @ symbol. For some reason, YouTube has it, that you got to have that @ symbol in there. Or I have the full video and audio feeds on our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/Gmote podcast. That's Ronnie with a Y instead of an IE, and Gmote, GMOAT podcast. Both of those are in the episode description of this episode, so check us out there. And if you do, please like the video or subscribe to us. We would really appreciate it. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. John Mayall, 90, British musician, often referred to as the godfather of British blues. Room to Move was a song of his, as was The Turning Point. Jerry Miller, 81, American musician and guitarist, was in the Jerry Miller Band and Moby Grape. Esta Terblanche, 51, South African actress, was in the soap opera All My Children. Jack Cameron White, 70, American drummer and actor, Sons of Anarchy, and Nashville, the TV show. David Laughley, 71, American screenwriter. Dreamscape, Money Train, and Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. And lastly, a personal loss to me, Bob Newhart, 94, American comedian and actor. The Bob Newhart Show, Newhart, Elf, won an Emmy in 1963 and a Grammy in 1961. Was also in Catch-22 as Major. For me, I grew up watching Bob Newhart and always loved him on his guest appearances on Dean Martin's show, then ultimately the Dean Martin roasts. Got to see him perform live. Ironically, right after his passing, we found at a estate sale the album, The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart, that won the Grammy in 1961, beating out Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, and Dean Martin for Best Album.
And I know that when we both mutually watched The Big Bang Theory, that you always enjoyed his Professor Proton, which is probably how this generation most remembers him. I know you also spent a considerable amount of time in the pandemic, or probably the second or third year of the pandemic. Not when we were all actually locked up, but when we were masking, if anyone cares to remember that point in time. But watching either, was it the Bob Newhart show or Newhart?
The original Bob Newhart show, which was dating back, because that was such stellar TV when I was a kid on Saturday nights. It was Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart. Oh, what was it? All in the Family. And I can't remember what was after that. And then the Carol Burnett show. I mean, if you were a kid, you could sit down and you would spend your entire night laughing.
But you know when your parents have a certain affinity for a particular performer or something else that's like very near and dear to them, they have a special relationship. I feel that it's going to be very similar to how you're going to feel when Mel Brooks passes finally. I think Mel's like 96 or 97 years young. My first reaction was I needed to call you and break the news to you myself. I didn't want, you just to see a blurb. I wanted to share that moment with you. So yeah, I know that you were just getting out of like a doctor's appointment at the time, but it's just one of those weird moments because I knew it was going to mean a lot to you in that time frame, and I know how much he meant to you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, somebody who grew up in television and movies and entertainment, my dad and I would spend hours watching this stuff together. There were certain entertainers that I have always connected with. And Bob Newhart was one of those comedians that I just always thought was a lot funnier than probably a lot of people did. Although he had a really good career. between television, movies, albums, etc. And I think there's a whole generation of people that will always remember him in Elf, being
the
Papa
head elf role. Yeah. And I know that we've spent most of our time reminiscing on Bob Newhart here, but just to give a couple of the other people on this list just some recognition a little bit. Both of the musicians we had started out with, I didn't really personally know who they were, but kind of reading about them, it's kind of unusual for people that have this profound an impact on music to pass away and we don't really know who they are. I mean, yes, one is referred to as the godfather of British blues, but reading through his obituary today to include it on the website that's going to be up with this episode, and I would encourage you all to go over there to possibly look in on it. He had an outsized impact on Eric Clapton, on people that ended up in Fleetwood Mac, in the Rolling Stones. I mean, he worked with a lot of people that are influential in British music, and it's kind of unusual how many people he seemed to touch and have influence over, and yet he was never a big player himself, seemingly, or at least he seemed to be outshone by all the people that he influenced, which is kind of unusual. And Jerry Miller also, I was not as familiar with him or his work, but apparently a very influential musician of the San Francisco counterculture of the 60s going into the 70s that I think had some effect on like Grateful Dead. And eventually I think some of his work carries forward as influential to like grunge music of the early 90s. I mean, that's how far reaching some of this stuff is. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to both of them as well. So we take a moment here to honor these for all of their contributions with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. All right, let's make the awkward transition to best funniest lines, the only way Bob Newhart would like. All right. First one up, I will take Jefferies. And what about the rest? Stella. When those cops at the station see Lisa, they'll even contribute.
I'll go with Stella, and I ask myself, what's General Motors got to be nervous about? Overproduction, I say. Collapse. If General Motors has to go to the bathroom 10 times a day, the whole country is ready to go. Jeff, of course, Stella, in economics, kidney problems have no relation to the stock market. Stella, it crashed, didn't it?
Stella, intelligence. Nothing has caused the human race so much trouble as intelligence.
Lisa, I wish I could be creative. Jefferies, oh, sweetie, you are. You have a great talent for creating difficult situations.
Let's see, Lisa, she's doing a woman's hardest job, juggling wolves.
Lisa, I'm not much on rear window ethics.
Jefferies, why would a man leave his apartment 3 times on a rainy night with a suitcase and come back 3 times? Lisa, he likes the way his wife welcomes him home.
Lisa, she doesn't love him. Jefferies, how can you tell that from here? Lisa, you said it looks like my apartment, doesn't it?
Stella, I can hear him now. Get out of my life, you wonderful woman. You're too good for me.
Stella, maybe one day she'll find her happiness. Jefferies, yeah, some man will lose his.
Jefferies, Miss Torso is the eat, drink, and be merry sort of girl. Stella, and she'll end up the fat, lonely alcoholic type.
Stella, we've become a race of peeping Toms. What people ought to do is get outside their house and look in for a change. Yes, sir, that's... how's that for a bit of homespun philosophy? Jefferies. Reader's Digest, April 1939. Well, I only quote from the best.
Gunnison. It's about time you got married, before you turn into a lonesome and bitter old man. Jefferies. Yeah, can't you just see me, rushing home to a hot apartment to listen to the automatic laundry and the electric dishwasher and the garbage disposal and the nagging wife? Gunnison. Jeff, wives don't nag anymore. They discuss.
Lisa, it doesn't make sense to me. Women aren't that unpredictable. A woman has a favorite handbag, and it always hangs on her bedpost where she can see it easily. And all of a sudden, she goes on a trip and leaves it behind? Why?
Any left, Dad?
Jefferies. She's too perfect. She's too talented. She's too beautiful. She's too sophisticated. She's too everything but what I want. Stella, is what you want something we can discuss?
I am out.
Lisa, where does a man get inspiration to write a song like that? Jefferies, he gets it from the landlady once a month. And last for me, Lisa.
Dad.
Oh, it's okay. Let him finish because I've got 3 more. So if he wants to finish,
go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were out.
Stella, I'm not shy. I've been looked at before, and another Stella one. No one's invented a polite word for killing yet.
Lisa, tell me exactly what you saw and what you think it means.
Ooh, actually, I have one more that I missed. Lisa, Jeff, if you're squeamish, just don't look.
That's great.
All right, let's move to the Stanley rubric and let's grade this thing out. So we start with Legacy, which is for the 5 years after the movie originally came out. So we would be looking at roughly 1959 and forward. So the last 65 years of its overall legacy. And we split the category between the audience and the industry. So, Dad, would you like to go first or second for this category?
I'll go second.
Okay. Legacy-wise, I don't think it's hard to debate that this is a film that is likely taught in film school. I think it is an absolute classic. It appears on a ton of different critics' lists. I still think it is an important film from one of the more important, if not epic, film directors of all time. So it would be very difficult for me to give anything but a 5 on the industry side of things, given its notoriety and its place within the annals of classic cinema. On the audience side of things, I do think there is an argument to be made, and I might be able to be swayed that this is not as popular or well-known or name-recognized, as we mentioned early on in this episode, as some of the other Hitchcock classics. But I do think for most people that have seen a good preponderance of his movies, this is probably in everybody's top 5, if it's not in its top 3. So I do think that this being one of the more rewatchable, if not the most rewatchable of his films, and during a just absolute murderer's row of films, 2 different periods in his career where he had like 3 or 4 films like right in a row that are all just significantly great. I think this is high up on the echelon of Hitchcock films that just about everybody should watch. So because I usually grade somewhere between about a 4, being that pretty much everybody in film nerd culture has probably seen it and knows of the film. And then when we get into how pervasive it is to the quote-unquote normies, as we've now named them, the normal audience, the casual moviegoers, I put this at about a 4.5. I have a 9.5 overall.
For me, I have industry as a 5. It's given great marks. It's considered one of his best, from probably one of the better directors, a director that was vastly underappreciated during his lifetime and who has risen to large levels, as our own rankings of directors shows. The public, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have put this a lot higher for the public because I think there was a larger body of people that had seen the film. But I think there's an aversion for people under 30, 35 to watch a lot of older films. So there's a large segment of the population that does not know much about this film. They may have heard of it. They probably haven't seen it. Where I normally would have went with a 4.5 or a 5, I'm going to go with a 4 overall, simply because I don't think it's really...
You don't mean overall, you mean from audience, right?
From audience. I don't think there's a large portion of people out that are in that category unless they're cinemaphiles. So I'm going to go with a 4 for the public, 5 for industry, for a 9 overall.
And I'm going to echo that sentiment exactly. I think we're all kind of on the same page with that the industry or the more film-oriented audience knows how important this film is, understands that it is one of the best films ever made, especially in this genre, but it just has not fully permeated the, I guess, sort of the cultural zeitgeist, especially of younger people the way that most people, I guess maybe older than 15 or so, at least kind of have a concept of what Psycho is, or what The Godfather is. These sort of huge pillars of cinema without ever having seen them. I don't think Rear Window has fully reached that. I think it's kind of just underneath that level, like one level down in terms of its legacy, but it just has not fully, with the average person, hasn't fully hit, you know, they know what it's about before someone has to tell them.
So that is a 9.17 average between the three of us. Let's move to impact and significance. Dad, why don't you lead off here?
Okay. This is the one where I had the most trouble. I personally, after having read some of the reviews and such, think the industry really did not appreciate this film for the quality and the impact it had and what it was going to ultimately be. I think they just looked at it as a piece of entertainment instead of great filmmaking. So I actually went with a 4 for the industry for that reason. I think it's risen among peers, critics, film watchers, movie lovers as it's gone by. And I think it took about 5 years for people to really appreciate it for more than just the fact that it was a film about this. The public seemed to like it. It was the 5th highest grossing film of 1954, made 5 times its budget. So I think overall the public, it wasn't the greatest. White Christmas was. Fun film, but why it would produce twice the number of tickets as this, I'm not sure. But so I went with a 4.5, so I'm at an 8.5 overall.
To be fair, to anyone that likes White Christmas and watches it annually, since it has apparently become a big thing on Netflix for people who basically don't watch older films. But for some reason, I know a lot of normies that watch that movie on Netflix every year. It is. I actually think White Christmas is probably a more or a higher legacy for people than this film. I think it should be inverted, but that's just my opinion. So, V, what do you think? Impact and significance.
So I have for industry a 4 and for audience 4.5. For industry, it's very similar that it got a lot of recognition. People weren't, slamming it in the review columns. They weren't saying it was awful. It wasn't one of these, it made a comeback years later. I think it was, people understood that it was good, but there was still some reviewers saying that it wasn't Hitchcock's best work, that it was not going to be really remembered. And they were kind of more focusing on the thrills, like, the murder aspect, and not some of the filmmaking mastery that was going on. And same with the audience. I think they enjoyed it. They liked it. It seems like it did, well financially, and just like people coming out of the theater, from the information I could find, seemed to like it. No one was, hating it. But I don't think they knew what they were seeing. Like, they didn't know that they were seeing a classic. And it's hard to, it's hard when you are, in the time to put a historical frame in the things that you see. But I think sometimes you do get lucky and you kind of can tell that you're seeing something that will be remembered for a long time. Like, I saw Inception in the theaters, and it was one of those things where it's like, this is the thing that's going to be talked about for a long time, especially amongst the film community. I don't think a lot of people maybe got that when they left the theater in 54. I think they kind of were like, oh, it's Hitchcock's kind of thrill of this time, and I'm going to just move on to the next thing.
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to ruin the average for myself a little bit.
Oh, well.
So I would agree with most of the points that have been made so far. I think that the industry felt it was pulpy and much more entertainment than it was true art. So there's a part of it where it's reserved. I think the fact that it didn't get some of the nominations that some of its contemporaries that year, obviously On the Waterfront, blew past this considerably as far as the Academy Awards and what else won in that particular year. I think it was just a purely good year for cinema in 1954. If you want more on this individual year, our guest has already been on an episode of revisiting this particular Oscars back from March on our, I can't call it sibling, but cousin podcast, The Revisionist Almanac, given how often that we mention their name. And I would say that because of that, I would probably put it at about a 4 for the industry. On a public side, I can't really make too many arguments. It did well financially, but it's not like it's the top grossing movie of the year. It's certainly not in the annals of like a Jaws or a Star Wars that reset the box office type of stuff, or even The Godfather, Gone with the Wind. I reserve that like high status. And given that it wasn't even necessarily number 1 or even a number 2 in its year, even though measuring the box office before about like 1970 is really difficult, I still put this at just a slight step down. So I have a 4 and a 4. I have an 8.
One in every crowd.
Some people's kids. So that's an 8.33 average between the three of us. Let's move to Novelty, and let's start with our guest.
I have it at a solid 9. It is not creating, I think anything that's a 10 is creating a genre or a subgenre that's never been seen before. So it very clearly is working within the confines of its genre. It is very much textbook suspense, not in a bad way. I mean, it executes the genre as perfectly as you possibly can, but outside of the limitations of watching from your window while you're in a wheelchair, it is still a very typical 1950s murder mystery. If you took that aspect away, if you're just focusing on the couple across the street, maybe you even filmed it from the perspective of, them in their house, it really wouldn't be that groundbreaking. But given everything that Hitchcock put into this and the unique setup of it, I think it is still a very novel and unique addition to this genre, but it is not completely changing the game or doing something that never has been seen before.
I'll actually go a slight variation from where you went. I don't think it creates its own genre, but I think it creates a subgenre of the nosy neighbor subgenre. I think there are a lot of films that are kind of like this or take a very similar cue from it, of people like investigating their neighbors, or something's off in the neighborhood type of thing. There have been a lot of movies like that, and they're borrowing in the footsteps of what this movie is. So honestly, from an originality standpoint, I actually went slightly higher in my half, and I've been experimenting for a while, trying to split this category between originality and execution. I actually think this is a higher originality score than it is an execution score. Even though the execution is very high, there's just something, because of its simplicity, especially this last rewatch, that I find a little bit more basic comparative to other Hitchcock films, where I think he's just got a higher degree of complexity that he's dealing with, whether you're talking Vertigo or Psycho, maybe even to like a production design of the birds has a higher degree of technicality compared to this. And I know maybe that's not fair to judge him against himself, but when you're talking about one of the all-time directors and you're trying to sort between his individual films, maybe that's the only way I'm going to go. Ultimately, I come down at the same 9.
Okay. For me, for any listeners who are not familiar, I read predominantly history, but I mix in mystery once in a while just to change the pace. As far as originality, where the murder took place, how it took place, how it was discovered, it's so Agatha Christie and Poirot. You could see it in probably 4 or 5 of the 50-some Poirot novels. Okay? So I can't give it originality. What I'm giving it originality from is just the concept that Hitchcock had of building an entire apartment square and filming it all from the perspective of the lead character is such a novel level of execution. I have to give it higher points. So from originality, I would, if I was just on that, I would probably be at about a 7 or a 7.5. I'm going to go up by the execution to an 8.5 by just the design of the set and how it was shot and how it was directed and all aspects of that, that made it such just a beautiful concept for a film. So I'm at 8.5.
So that is an 8.83 between the three of us. Classicness, and this is kind of a measurement of how well things have aged over time. It can be about how something was ahead of its time, how well it's held up over time. Dad, this is normally your category to start, and I will let you do so.
I usually start around a 7 and I start subtracting, okay? This is New York in the early 1950s, okay? So you have to take into account the traditional male-female roles. What you can do is look at this film as being basically the precursor of the entire voyeuristic aspect of American society, right down to reality TV. I think that this film foretold the movie network and what was going to be taking place on network television, and foretold all aspects of the voyeuristic reality TV that we've grown to love, to the point that we decide to hold up as a politician a reality TV show host. So I'm giving it a 10. You could take this film now and put it out, and I think it would be just as poignant today as it would have been back in 1954. I think it was ahead of its time, and I think Hitchcock was tuned in to where American society was ultimately going.
Well, V, I'm going to put you in the unenviable spot of trying to follow a 10, but are you following his lead or no?
I'm going down to a 9, just because it's because he tells Grace Kelly to shut up, and that would not happen. That would not fly today. That's the only scene outside of, like, I don't know, the joke around wives who nag, but really it's not done in a mean-spirited way, where there's sort of a dynamic between a male and female partner where, like, it's very clear that the man is supposed to be, like, the final say in the argument, just because that's the role that he has been given by society, that he can kind of get away with telling her that, where I just feel like it just seemed more mean-spirited than audiences would like, and there are just some more quips about, I guess, heteronormative relationships that people would find old-fashioned today, but it's not to the point where it's, like, so offensive or so close-minded or so sort of, like, shoving, old-school values down anyone's throat. I feel like it's very mild for its time period, and I actually think people from today, if they've never seen it, would find it enjoyable regardless of that. And very similar, it is predicting a nation of voyeurs, essentially, that it's only gotten worse from this time period on, to the point that we have people who are making a living by essentially allowing themselves to be voyeured upon, that, people make millions of dollars as influencers now, and it's basically kind of like, let's be honest, Miss Torso would have an OnlyFans these days. Like, she or, people similar to her that people have become to capitalize on it, where it seems like at the time that the film or the culture around the people in this film are judging him harshly for, oh, you're a peeping Tom, you quit looking through your telescope, blah, 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 where honestly we're kind of doing much worse now, even though I guess the subjects are somewhat consenting to it. But I feel like that the level of privacy is largely gone, and that just occasionally peeking out your window at your neighbor would not even, like, register as being too creepy these days, unless, like, maybe you're going into their property and, like, climbing through the window or something. So I just, I think it's kind of like from there it kicked off. It was making some good cultural statements, and I wish they could have, the original author of this story could have seen what the world has become.
I would very much tend to agree on it being very ahead of its time in predicting things. I think if you're so involved, like, I think there is an argument to be made by someone. I would not make this argument, but just to play devil's advocate, I will. that would see this as kind of outdated given the technology and how reliant it is on spying on your neighbors. And we've talked a little bit about how more closed up everybody is in their neighborhood. They don't really know their neighbors comparatively to an older generation. But we put a lot of our lives, and a lot of millennials are very outward on their social media feeds. It really does not take much to be able to peer in on your neighbors. It's a curated version of reality, the happiest moments of your life, allegedly, all online, as opposed to your neuroses and all the like complexities of who people actually are. Part of the reason I don't particularly care for social media, and I farm out some of our social media posting and such to people who are more attuned to that type of thing. But I'll just say that I think it's ahead of its time. I really also think this is somewhat classic. We talked about the wholesome nature of the film. There's really nothing too out of place if you understand kind of the relationship or the gender dynamics, as we've mentioned kind of before. You could get stuck on a little bit of that, and I would be okay with some of the gradations here or there. But ultimately, I think I come down around the same area as my dad, that it's probably a 10 for me because it is just kind of wholesome. It falls into a similar category I would have for like The Wizard of Oz. There's really nothing to say about that being ill classic, and because of its wholesome nature, I have this in a similar vein. So I'm glad we brought on somebody so we didn't have the full 10. We had a little bit of degree of like integrity, but that ends up as a 9.67 average between the three of us. As far as rewatchability, am I putting this on of my own volition? Not all the time. Like, it's high on that list given how often I've seen it. We put it on for fun all the time at the Duncan household. It's really not like out of place that, oh, what do we want to watch? Well, Rear Window's here. Oh yeah, okay, well, sure, we'll throw this on. I mean, it's one of a rotation of certain favorites depending on whom you're watching the movie with. Like, if my mom's involved, then this movie is likely to be watched more often than not. But I have it about a 4 as to putting it on. But the minute that it goes on, you're finishing the film. Unless you have like something that you absolutely need to stop and go do elsewise, like you need to go to work or something. It's so I have
Work
it at a 9.
Wait. Work can wait.
Sure.
I have it as a 10 for both because I mean, now I'm trying to watch, I'm trying to broaden my horizons and see new stuff. So I haven't really been doing a lot of rewatching, but if I am going to rewatch something, I will rewatch this. Like there's never been a time where I won't do it. And also if it was on, I don't know, on a cable channel or in somebody else's home or something, I wouldn't ever be like, I'm not over this. I would 100%. I'm down every time.
For me, I'm going to make your math easy.
You're going to go 9.5?
Yes, I am. And the reason I don't give it a full 10 is because it still has to hit me the right way. If I'm having a really shitty day, okay, even though I love this movie and it's perfect in so many ways, do I really want to sit and watch about a murder? Maybe not. And that would be the only points down for me. Because I tried to think about this when the issue came up. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen this film. I would let's just put that I've seen it at least 15 times. At least. It's probably more. And the rotation in the house is probably every 6 to 8 months. And it has been for 15 or 20 years. So, yeah. And so, yes, it's going to be in that thing. So I'm going to go with 9.5.
Okay, so that gives us an average of 9.5, which he was alluding to there. An audience score?
Yeah, I didn't want to disrupt the math for you.
For an audience score, we have a 90% for Google users and a 95% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us a final of 9.25 for that individual score. So to repeat the categories, we have a 9.17 for legacy, an 8.33 for impact and significance, We have an 8.83 for novelty. We have a 9.67 for classicness, a 9.5 for rewatchability, and a 9.25 for audience score, giving us a final total of 54.75. And any guesses where that currently places on our list?
7.
V, a guess?
I can't guess where that is because I can't remember where the other ones that I've listened to have fallen. So
okay, so currently of our top 10, so it will fall within our top 10. We have 5 films that all meet the criteria of 54 points or higher. We only have one film that is this high before we get into the 55s, 56s. So it's not quite 12 Angry Men, North by Northwest, Jaws, or The Dark Knight, but it is tied at number 5 with Casablanca.
oh, I thought it was going to be, I don't know, top 20. I wasn't expecting it to be so high. Woohoo!
Well, there you go. It is number 2 on our overall Hitchcock scores, though. North by Northwest comes in at number 3. So, all right. With that, if you disagree with any of our scoring or our opinions on this movie, as I'm sure there will be a few people out there that are naysayers, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com or at any of our socials at gmotepodcast on Instagram, X, Twitter, or Twitter X, or however we're referring to it these days, Letterboxd, YouTube, or TikTok. And we also can be reached at our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMotePodcast. And again, that is Ronnie with a Y, not an I-E, and GMote, G-M-O-A-T. Let's move into remaining questions. So I have 3 that I made here, but we also have some listener questions. Any preference on where we start?
Why don't you start with your questions because I have my answers prepared for.
Okay. So let's start with, who was the woman posing as Thorwald's wife? Now, the reason I ask this is it a mistress?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of alluded to, but, you know, I
mean,
think it's open to interpretation a little.
But I feel like who else is going to be at your house at like 3 or 4 in the morning? I mean, maybe a sister who hates your wife, who wants to help you get away with the murder or something. But I feel like people would probably know that was his sister or something, especially if she's been over before or something like that. So yeah. I think that it's a mistress because I think she wants the original Mrs. Thorwald out of the picture. And I think the problem is she's ill and it probably costs money to care for her, or it's just a pain in the butt to take care of her. And she's not particularly nice up to him while he is supporting her and having to physically take care of her as well. So I think he probably has a side chick and she's down with the idea of him getting rid of her. So she's willing to work with the plan. I think it's kind of like Lisa's interpretation of what's going on is kind of viewed as correct. And I think her saying she's not yet Mrs. Thorwald is the correct interpretation.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at relationships that he could have with someone else where they would directly benefit from a murder, that's the most likely scenario. All right, number 2. Why dig up the saw and knife if you are going to already kill the dog? That just seems like a panic move.
Yeah, I think you need to answer your second question and what will be your third question simultaneously. Having been a criminal defense attorney for 17 years and having actually tried homicides, only about 60% of a premeditated murder are actually thought through and planned. Most of the rest is just reaction and panic. Okay? So something happens. The dog starts finding the head, and the head's buried in the garden with the knife and saw, and so all of a sudden, now you panic, like, okay, well, I'll kill the dog. Nothing will happen with that, because of course a dog ends up dead. Nobody's going to question that. Yeah, right. Instead, you've got to immediately go to, okay, well, if that dog found it, what do I do with the next dog that might find it? So you panic, and I got to move it. without any thought through of what the ramifications are, or for that matter, he probably didn't think through where to hide the head, the saw, and the knife to begin with.
So since you had incorporated the third question, my last one was supposed to be, what do you think Thorwald's plan was in confronting Jefferies? And your insinuation is that there was no plan.
There wasn't. He knew he was in trouble. He was going to get caught. The person who could catch him was Jefferies, so kill Jefferies and hope for the best that you can somehow get away. It's not thought through or rational.
I actually think he, at the very beginning when he enters the apartment, is actually thinking that maybe he can bribe him or talk him out of reporting him to the authorities, because he asks, "Who are you and what do you want?" Which, if you are 100% certain this person is just going to report you for the murder you did, you wouldn't ask him that. You would just get straight to the killing. But I think because this guy, it's also kind of hinted that he's a very money-oriented person. His job is like a salesman. I don't know what kind of salesman, but I don't know. There's kind of always like a seediness, especially like 1950s door-to-door salesmen have like a connotation to them of being kind of shallow and maybe a little slimy. And he's also, the first thing he does is sell the jewelry. Like that's like his next move after getting rid of the body is like, how can I profit off of this? Not just getting her out for convenience sake. So I think he was thinking, if I'm money motivated, maybe Jefferies is money motivated or has some other reason for bothering me. And if I can give him what he wants, maybe he'll shut up and go away. And then as soon as Jefferies makes it clear that there is no budging with his determination to bring him to justice, then it goes to murder. So it's kind of like appease and then murder.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. I think by the progression of the scene, that makes a lot of sense to me, that you're bartering with it. And as you mentioned that, obviously he says it's too late. She's already gone to the police. They already have the ring by now. So there's really not much left to do. And so he just kind of acts out of pure passion at that point. It was just more of like, he's going there with a specific purpose. I think that the notion of asking him, what do you want, has to have some clear objective to it before you would leap to making a rather public murder, because like throwing him out a window is not much of a plan. That just seems more in the moment, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a good plan. I mean, I think he was intending to kill him, but after that thought, it wasn't like, well, what's next? I think it was, kind of frenzied.
Okay. Before we get to the listener questions, did either of you have any remaining questions?
I do. He makes it clear that he doesn't have a lot of money, and where they're living and how they're living doesn't appear to be a lot of money. By 1954, divorce was not uncommon. Okay, why would you need to murder her? Why not just divorce her? I mean, there might be a certain consideration of alimony because of her medical condition that you would have to pay and would have to limit your ability to live after that. But the risk associated with it, I don't see it. It's not like, she was an heiress, and if she died suddenly, any of the money she had would go to him. Which would favor murder as opposed to, just divorce.
I think he hates her. I don't think it's just the fact that she is he calls her an invalid, but I don't really think she's a full-on, that term's also kind of offensive, but I don't think she's actually she gets out of bed. He does something because we can't fully hear everything. And she gets out of bed to confront him for saying something that upset her. So she's not, I guess, completely unable to move. But I think she's just been making his life miserable. And I think if she hadn't been like that, maybe he probably wouldn't have killed her. He probably would have still continued maybe he would continue to love her and be happy, but I think maybe she probably took to being ill poorly and got, kind of internalized the negativity around that and just became a miserable person to live with. And I think after, I don't know how long it's been, but after a certain amount of years, he probably was just like, I've had enough. It also might just look bad for his reputation to divorce a crippled, injured, disabled, whatever word you want to throw at it, woman. It just, it might be like he's an abandoner or something, even if he's paying alimony.
All right, let's go to the listener questions then. First, we'll start with our question queen from the UK, Heather Stewart, who will be making her debut on this particular program in 3 weeks for The Life of Brian. But number one, is Lisa the actual hero of the story?
No. She doesn't really grow. I mean, she does something in front of Jeff that she's never done before, but I mean, I guess hero in Saves the Day, yes. Hero in the literary term of the protagonist who grows, no, because that is Jeff. Jeff grows as a person because of this. So she saves the day, and she's brave, but she's not the main focus of the story. This story is not about her.
Yeah, I can't really fault any of that, so I have nothing to add. Dad?
I really don't have much else.
Man, I feel kind of bad, but fortunately, she has 2 more questions for us. On a scale of 1 to 10, how annoying is it not to be able to scratch an itch? 15?
Yeah, max.
And finally, is this Hitchcock's best movie? If yes, why? And if not, what is? I think we have 1 vote for Psycho. We have 1 vote for North by Northwest. Boy, I mean, at a certain point, it really is sorting between like 5 or 6 different movies that are all like equally great. Like I put this one easily among. You probably have the critics' favorite in Vertigo. You have Psycho, North by Northwest. You have this one. It's hard for me not to say Psycho, having done all of these on the show, as far as a technical mastery, control of craft, tone, creation of different things. It's hard for me not to say that one, but I'd be accepting of an argument for probably any of these, really. Maybe that's just too much of a fence-sitter argument, but yeah, that's probably where I come down. All right, and finally we have a question from Mike Emo from Cinemus, and he is going to be making his debut in mid-September on Anatomy of a Murder. But who is your favorite of Jeff's neighbors to spy on?
It's a tie for me between Miss Torso and the pianist / songwriter. I love that at the end, Miss Torso's like true love is this like short, fat dude. So I actually think it makes her character, I think, cuter, and also once again it proves Lisa right, that Lisa knows women because she's with all these men at one of the scenes and shows that she doesn't actually love any of them. And he's like, how do you know? And then at the very end we see that her true love came home, and she's not shallow because she's dating someone who is like below her in attractiveness. So I think she's a lot of fun, and I also really like the songwriter because he's kind of goes through a lot of different, very similar emotions to anyone who's in an artistic field of being like frustrated with your work and being tired. And then he has parties that are fun. So he's a lot of fun. So I like both of those.
I'd probably go in the similar to both of those. I mean, I think she's a lot of fun. I think she's got a lot of character, and we see a lot of different sides of her. I do like her ending probably the most of any of them. Miss Lonelyhearts, while we spend so much time with her, I don't know. The pantomiming date thing has always kind of sat a little odd with me, but like it's obviously supposed to be putting forward a air of desperation. I think that's what kind of like turns me off on that. I really don't have anything with the dog and the couple and the who also have the mattress and whatever, but I think outside of those, the musician to me, just because I have such a fondness for those that are able to create music, given that it feels so foreign to me. Like, it's one thing for anybody to write because we do that in school, and you may not be good at it, but you kind of like feel I'm one Starbucks visit away from writing my own screenplay or something like that, those pipe dreams that everybody has. But not everybody's like, I'm gonna pick up a keyboard and be able to write the new hit song today. At least not that I know of. Like, that doesn't seem as accessible for the general population to take a chance on. Maybe with auto-tune it has been, but I don't know.
I'm going to get a little deep here. Okay.
Ooh.
One of my favorite artists is Edward Hopper. And Hopper is notorious for crafting paintings, which convey a sense of being absolutely alone in a crowd. So for me, it's Miss Lonelyhearts. She foreshadows the whole social media aspect where people put themselves out on dating apps. Is it swipe left, I guess, if you're being rejected, or is it swipe right? I don't know.
Swipe right is to accept, left is to reject.
Yeah, so in modern times, she would not be called Ms. Lonelyheart. She would be called Ms. Swipe Left.
That one's for you, Jesse.
And I think that she, more than anything, is the most interesting character in there of the neighbors. And I think she foreshadowed an element of loneliness that has permeated through American culture as time has gone by and is now becoming a significant portion of America, especially since the pandemic, that people feel alone and isolated from people and lacking in the ability to have relationships. And every time I watch her in the film, I have a level of empathy that even now it kind of makes me choke up a bit, because I've seen so many people in those situations. And I myself will admit have been in those situations at times in my life.
And I would say that I think the Surgeon General has declared a state of emergency across the country based on loneliness. So it's not something new, but obviously something we're still grappling with. Now, I will turn the question on its head. This is a follow-up made up by me. But the question originally was, who is your favorite of Jeff's neighbors to spy on? Who is your favorite Jeff to spy on?
I guess Joel McHale's character from Community.
That's not a bad one.
I'm trying to think of somebody named Jeff right now.
Not Dahmer.
Well, first off, yeah, well, being from Wisconsin, yeah, okay. I would say the one I thought of that actually might be the most fun, because he probably would invite you over after you're done spying, would be Jeff Bridges. And to hang out with the dude, that would be a good one. Well, at this point, I would like to thank our guest for being on with us again. This is your third time. 2 more for your hat. But last time you were on, I remember you were coming out with your audiobook. What new announcements and fun, exciting things in the VP Morris library do we have going on now?
So in March 25, I will be publishing my first paranormal thriller, and it's called The Devil We Used to Know. So keep an eye out for that. I'll have obviously more in my social medias, which are at TWriteRepeat on Instagram and X. Nothing particularly new has come out because I have been working on this a lot over the last few years. It's my pandemic project that's finally becoming a reality, but I have 2 thrillers, one on audiobook, Shadowcast, and Deadbringer, found on Amazon and all the internet places for books.
So we'll have all of her links available on our website and also in the show description. We'll have her social media links as well for anyone who wants to find you there. But Dad, quickly, any final thoughts for the week?
Looking forward to my appearance for the 1942 episode. I'm 12 films in. How far are you?
So he means the Revisionist Almanac, so yes, that we're just clear with everybody. So we get that title in there. I am 3 minutes away from finishing my 4th film. It has taken me 8 days to try and watch a 2-hour film, given the amount of things that are currently on my plate. I feel like...
and isn't it To Be or Not to Be, which is extremely light compared to the other films?
I understand. Oh. I'm trying my best, but I have an employer who's demanding a lot of me as other people are shirking their responsibilities. Ooh. I have a law school that has apparently not defined when class actually starts, so I have appointments for that. I have friends who are requiring my presence apparently this following weekend, and I have a show that is increasingly getting longer, thus creating more and more editing. And as such, I think I likened it to the analogy yesterday of it feels like I'm in the trash compactor on the Death Star, and I'm trying to brace the sides, and it is not working. So, with that...
Been there, done that.
I know. You've already been through law school, and your apt description, which yet to this day, no one has ever argued with, and in fact, most people have said that's probably the most accurate description I've ever heard, is it's like having a root canal through your anus for 3 years. I did say at the beginning of this that it might get graphic, or that we might have some profane language. So if you made it this far into the podcast, congratulations. But that'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. I See Dead People. Next week for our 222nd episode, we welcome our new celebrity guest, Frank Mendoza of the Silver Screeners podcast, to discuss one of the most often discussed film twists of all time for its 25th anniversary, The Sixth Sense, written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan, music by James Newton Howard, starring Bruce Willis, Toni Collette, Olivia Williams, and Haley Joel Osment. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieduncanstudios.com or at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Or find us on YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.